Stand by for mode 1, Charlie 17. Mark, mode 1, Charlie.
And the flight dynamics officer says we look good on all sources, right on the trajectory. Crew will experience maximum G-forces of about 4 Gs at shutdown. Coming up on first stage shutdown. I think we saw them all from here.
Roger, Jack. The thrust is going, all 5 up there. Running good. Roger, 17, you're go.
I am my brother's keeper. And when you say the name Jacob Blake, make sure you say father, make sure you say cousin, make sure you say son, make sure you say uncle, but most importantly, make sure you say human. Human life. Let it marinate in your mouth, in your minds. A human life. Just like every single one of y'all. And everywhere around, so we're human. And his life matters. So many people have reached out to me telling me they're sorry that this happened to my family. Well, don't be sorry, because this has been happening to my family for a long time. Longer than I can account for. It happened to Emmett Till. Emmett Till is my family. Philando, Mike Brown, Sandra. This has been happening to my family. And I've shared tears for every single one of these people that it's happened to. This is nothing new. I'm not sad. I'm not sorry. I'm angry. And I'm tired. I haven't cried one time. I stopped crying years ago. I am numb. I have been watching police murder people that look like me for years. I'm also a Black history minor. So not only have I been watching it in the 30 years that I've been on this planet, but I've been watching it for years before we were even alive. I'm not sad. I don't want your pity. I want change.
Greetings and welcome, brothers and sisters, to Knowledge for Life's first Knowledge Cypher conference series. This one we're focusing on mental health. So we're hashtagging Black Mental Health Matters. I am your host, Brother Steve Muhammad. And once again, this is Knowledge Cypher conference series where we bring together Black professionals to talk on issues impacting the Black community. Today, we're talking about overcoming the mental trauma of systemic racism. And so I want to go ahead and introduce our guest. But before I do that, I want to make a quick disclaimer. And that is that this presentation is for educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for medical advice or seeking professional help through therapy or treatments. So with that, I want to introduce our first panelist, Sister Deasia Thomas. She's a licensed independent social worker, social worker supervisor, and professor in Dayton, Ohio. Her practice, Rise Counseling Group, focuses on the mental wellness of Black teen girls and women and other women of color, offering them space to heal and to have hope when dealing with anxiety and depression. And let me bring her on. All right. Greetings, sister. How you doing today? Oh, your mic is on mute.
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
All right,
Sorry
good.
about that.
No problem. We were going to start off with some mental health issues if that mic didn't work. We're going to bring on our next panelist, Brother Melvin, Dr. Melvin, excuse me. I know my brother, so Dr. Melvin Hinton, and he is the Chief of Mental Health Services in the Illinois Department of Corrections. Let me bring my brother on. Greetings, Doctor.
Good afternoon, good almost evening in some parts of the country. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. And we're going to let you all give a better description of yourselves after we bring everyone on. So our next guest, we have Dr. Monique Swift. She is the owner and founder of SwiftSolutionsConsultant.com. And I will go ahead and bring her on.
Good evening, everyone.
All right. And bringing up the rear, we have Dr. Dwayne McClure, and he is a licensed clinical medical health counselor in the state of North Carolina and licensed clinical professional counselor in the state of Maryland. And so I will bring my brother on. And greetings, Dr. McClure.
Good evening, Brother Muhammad and panelists. Thank you.
Yes. And so we want to start with ladies first. And Sister Deasia, if you could go first, just give us a brief description of yourself and in the mental health field.
Yeah, so my name is Deasia Thompson. I am, like you said, the owner of Rise Counseling Group, which is a private practice here in Dayton, Ohio. I am a licensed independent social worker in the state of Ohio, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Tennessee. I've been in practice since 2011 as a licensed social worker, and I've done treatment in a multitude of areas: private practice, residential treatment, college counseling. So I've kind of run the gamut, and I have found home in working with Black women and other women of color that are struggling with anxiety and depression from the different roles that we carry on a day-to-day basis and the things that we carry with us. So I work to just provide space for them so that they're able to deal with some of those different intersectional areas that impact them daily. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we'll go with you next, Dr. Monique. If you could go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, so again, good evening, family, and to my brother Stephen, thank you for inviting me to the show and for creating this forum. I think it's really important, especially right now for us and Black people in this country. So my name is Dr. Monique Swift, and I'm originally from Staten Island, New York. I currently reside in New Jersey, where I operate, I have my business, which is Swift Solutions Consultant Services. And my business is comprised of private practice, small private practice in Rahway, New Jersey, as well as consulting work. I have a assortment of experience working with adults, working with children, working in hospital settings, schools, and so forth. But in recent times, I've been more focused on practice and consultant work. And my consultant work is mostly in the area of trauma and helping organizations, agencies to become trauma informed. I use a trauma lens with most everything that I do now. And so it really kind of provides a way to begin to talk about healing, specifically in relation to us as Black people. So it's my consulting work. And in addition to that, I have my feet in a few different places, but the other pretty important place that I put my foot and my time and my effort is with the Association of Black Psychologists. I'm currently serving my second term as president of the New Jersey chapter of the Association of Black Psychologists, which is an organization of conscientious and progressive Black professionals who are at the top of their game, not just as Black psychologists, but they're at the top of their professional game, across the board. So I'm really proud to be in association with that group. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Melvin, can you go next?
Absolutely. Again, thank you for having me part of this panel and an important discussion and with these distinguished panelists. So I am Dr. Melvin Hinton. I am a licensed clinical psychologist living in the state of Illinois. I am the chief of mental health services for the Illinois Department of Corrections, the adult division of corrections. I have been in correctional mental health services for about 19 years now, in a couple of different capacities, working in jails and then ultimately in prisons. I too have worked in some other settings, inpatient psychiatric, college counseling center, community mental health. Started my mental health career working with kids, adolescents, in a runaway shelter and transitional living home. So lots of kind of varied experience, but very passionate about working with people who are incarcerated or justice involved. Unfortunately, a number of folks who are incarcerated look like me, look like us, and they oftentimes are in need of quality mental health services. So it's my position, and I believe my duty, to ensure that they receive proper care. So that's one of my kind of passions. Additionally, I teach undergraduate students at the University of St. Francis here in Illinois, in Joliet, Illinois. I enjoy doing that. Gives me a little bit of a break outside of corrections and forensic justice involved world. So in a nutshell, that's me. Excited to be a part of this discussion and looking forward to our topics.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, brother. And so, Dr. McClure, you were bringing up the rear. Can you give us some information about yourself?
All right. Good evening, and thank you, Brother Muhammad, for this forum. As I listened to the introduction video, it just really brought it home. You could almost experience the trauma in her voice as she expressed herself, her eyes, her face, her affect. I think it really kind of set the tone for tonight's discussion. But my name is Dwayne McClure. I'm originally from the Maryland, DC area. My original training as my master's is licensed clinical mental health counselor in the state of North Carolina and a licensed clinical professional counselor in the state of Maryland. My background is varied, of course, through higher ed, private practice, anxiety, depression, grief, loss, and my doctorate is in management and organizational leadership. So some of my passions are really finding spaces to help coach people in terms of their professional work. A lot of times these discussions lead to toxicity in the workplace and stress in the workplace. And all people, and especially Black folks, talking about social stressors in the workplace and need people there to help them coach themselves to leadership roles. So that's a particular passion. And I also maintain a clinical practice, telehealth, where I see a number of folks, predominantly Black clientele, for folks that are coming in for, once again, anxiety, depression, grief, loss, work-life issues, and especially COVID has only exacerbated many of this, as well as everything that was happening this summer. A lot of the issues between the racial turmoil, the social injustice, COVID, the political climate that we're in, a lot of this stuff seems to be surfacing within therapy sessions. And so I think some of that will come to bear in this conversation tonight. So once again, thank you, Brother Muhammad and panelists.
All right. Thank you, brother. And let's see here. So what we want to do, we want to first go into our question. Of course, let's break down what is mental health. let's go ahead and break down what is trauma, what is systemic racism. And so we'll start off, and we'll go with you, Dr. Melvin. What is mental health? What is proper mental health?
Yeah, it's actually a question that I've really been thinking about as we're, starting this. And so when you talk about mental health, it includes our emotional, our psychological, and our social well-being, right? And so certainly defining it in terms of what we expect it to be positive. What is our emotions? What are our feelings, right? What are our thoughts, our psychology, our psychological processes? And what about our social well-being? How do we interact with each other? How do we interact with our families? How do we interact at work and in our communities? All of these things make up kind of the fabric of mental health. And certainly our focus has got to be on ensuring that we have a positive, healthy, well-balanced mental health state. I think it's oftentimes misconstrued that if you are down, if you have a bad day, if things are going wrong, that somehow means your mental health is horrific. That's a part of the process. Everyone has bad days, just like everyone has good days, right? But we're looking for a balance. We're looking for people to be able to navigate through life, to be able to interact appropriately with their families, with their friends, with their social networks in a healthy, balanced way. So in a nutshell, that's what mental health is from my perspective.
Yes, sir. And would anyone else like to chime in on that?
I'm going to, I think Dr. Melvin summed it up perfectly, but I want to just get on my soapbox about it, if I may, as it relates to, when it comes to mental health, in the society that we're currently in, the way we look at science and health in particular, it's very reductionist. Everything is its own component and seems to be unrelated to other things. So you have a doctor for a kidney, you have a doctor for, the lungs, you have a doctor for every part of the body. And because of that way of thinking about health, we ignore the interdependence and the inextricable intertwining between aspects of our physical body and as well our mental health and physical health. So I like to lean more toward discussing health, or emphasizing, at least, because in reality we do separate it, but at least emphasizing the point that mental health is inextricable from physical health, which is inextricable from mental health, which I tie, especially when we're talking about Black people, we need to also tie that into spiritual health as well.
Yeah, I was absolutely going to agree with that. And it affects, right? It affects each of those spheres, so to speak. If you're not physically well, you're definitely not mentally well, or I should say, you're definitely affected on your mental health and your well-being, and certainly spirituality for those who are spiritual definitely influences.
Yes. And so let's go ahead to go right ahead, Dr.
I like to look at things in terms of systems. And what I mean by systems, for example, to build on what Doctors Monique and Melvin were saying, how does a person situate themselves in the middle of their life? And what I mean by that is, what do you look like as an individual? Then above that, what do you look like within relationship as a couple? Then above that, what do you look like within the context of your family? Then above that, what do you look like within the context of your community? And above that, what do you look like in the context of your nation? So we're all a part of a system, and relationships have impact on us. Families have impact back on us. Communities have impact back on us, and nations have impact back on us. I know many might be familiar with the concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are. It's if the community is fractured, then to some degree the community is our mirror. And how do we see ourselves through a fractured mirror? We see ourselves as fractured as well. Building on what they're saying, it is a part of an entire system. I see myself as I cannot be fully well until I'm promoting systems that are also fully well. That means I have to participate in forums like this. I have to participate in forums that are building relationship, building couple, building community, building nation. Because when I'm doing those things, then I'm showing myself present at individual, relationship, family, couple, community, and nation. I want to see myself throughout the spectrum of experience. And I would consider that as an aspect of wellness.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thank you. I mean, that's a holistic look at it. And I think that definitely is something that we need to really consider when as individuals, when we think about mental health. Let's go into the definition of trauma. Sister Deasia, can you give us what trauma is? What is trauma?
Sure. So when we think about trauma, we're looking at. I like to think of it in a couple of different ways. So when we think about trauma, we always think about specifically PTSD, right? PTSD being a diagnostic label that we use with the DSM, right? So a lot of times people think about trauma in that one realm, and they don't understand trauma as an event or a series of events that have an impact on or a set of circumstances that have an impact on a person that they've experienced that impacts them physically, emotionally, spiritually, and it harms them. Trauma can be a singular event. You can be exposed to trauma chronically, and trauma is subjective. So some things that people do not find traumatic may be traumatic to another person. And trauma can be things that are natural or man-made, and also historical, right? So a natural trauma would be like what we experienced in Dayton last year with the tornado. So that's a natural trauma. We have man-made trauma such as war. And then we also have historical trauma such as slavery, and the ongoing trauma that we're experiencing as we're witnessing police brutality and things like that. So when we talk about trauma, we have to make that distinction that it's not just about that diagnostic criteria, although we're using that because we are, like Dr. Duane said, a part of systems and insurance and, all that. But we need to think of it as these events or series of events that have an impact that cause harm in some way to the folks, to ourselves and others.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. Anyone else would like to touch on that? Trauma is trauma.
If I can go, I certainly think trauma and Deasia summed it up very well. Certainly the buzzwords, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? PTSD, that's what we see in the media. That's what we hear on the radio, talk shows. But I think that our field globally is really evolving. We're starting to see trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder really recognized amongst a group that isn't just military or having some major acute trauma, but we're starting to see, as she said, recognition that reoccurring trauma, chronic trauma is just as damning and damaging as people who go to war. So if you live in neighborhoods where there's frequent violence, if you are constantly exposed to violent acts, violent crime, or even disparities there can be some real trauma, and that affects your mental health.
All right, excellent,
Yeah.
excellent.
I want
I
So,
Sister Monique, real quick, and I'll get with you, Brother Dwayne, because I wanted to ask Sister Monique, you know, when we talk about trauma, we talked off screen, for instance, about epigenetics and how trauma can cross generational lines. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. So before I touch on that, I just want to add a little bit to the conversation. We were talking about kind of framing trauma, understanding trauma. Trauma is important, I think, also to understand when you're talking about trauma when it comes to us, is that trauma is not just kind of an individual phenomenon, but that trauma also is a collective experience. Howard Penderhughes out of the West Coast talks about this collective trauma that we experience. He calls community trauma. And so when we think of community trauma, often we think about, you know, there's living in a community where there's a lot of violence, but he's specific to mention that community trauma, when we're talking about community trauma, we're not talking about a lot of people who live in the same place who are all traumatized. What we're really talking about is a unit of people who are collectively experiencing the pain, injury, and hurt of a structural violence that is happening. So we're all talking about, you know, structural racism. That's a violence that's perpetrated against Black people that not only hurts individuals, but also creates a hurt that is beyond the individual, that impacts us as a community of people. And what does that end up looking like? That ends up looking like it impacts our physically built environment. When structural racism impacts, you know, whether we have green spaces in our community or not, whether there are supermarkets. There are a lot of communities where they're food deserts, we're calling them, right? There are a lot of communities where there's a liquor store on every single corner, right? This is not, you know, by mistake. This is by design, and this creates impairment. This harms and hurts communities. It also impacts on the collective level our social connections, our cultural standing. And so you'll have we're very fragmented as a result of this structural violence. We're very fragmented as a community. We don't function together. If you look at a lot of Jewish communities, a lot of Chinese communities, these are communities of people that function together. They pull their collective resources. They operate as a unit. That has been damaged and broken through the structural violence that is kind of heaped on us every single day. And finally, also in the educational and economic arena as well, the violence there also impacts us and disables us. It renders us a community of people without efficacy. And so I think that's I just want to kind of take a moment to throw that in, because I think that's an important way of understanding trauma as well. He calls it synergistic trauma, that Black people, we don't only suffer from the daily traumas that we experience personally, but we also suffer from another level of trauma that we experience collectively. So,
and isn't that exacerbated by COVID as well? Don't we see the results of that in you know, prime time with COVID?
Teach on it. Come on.
Right. I don't want to take away from Dwayne, but I just think, you know, you talk about that trauma and that kind of collective view, and you think about COVID, and you think about disparities in access to healthcare, inability to go and get tested on a regular basis, inability to get results, and inability to access primary care. As you said, by design, those are traumatic factors. Imagine what it would be like. And unfortunately, a lot of us deal with clientele and patients who have to deal with this on a regular basis. But imagine what it'd be like to not be able to take your kids to the doctor on any given day, at any given time. Imagine kind of going, I'm not sure if I can stay home while my kid is doing distance learning, or, how do I how do I get PPE? How do I get a face mask? How do I do those kind of what we want to say are basic things, because I simply don't have access to it. I just want to throw that out in the discussion.
Yes, and Dr. Dwayne,
You know, Deja really started us off on the right foot with the understanding of post-traumatic stress. I just wanted to throw out this thought. Some might even suggest that trauma is not necessarily post in some communities. If you are perpetually a privileged position to suggest that trauma happens and now you're removed from it, you are now post this thing that happens. And so I think that's a little bit of what everyone has been articulating, is that it's almost traumatic stress disorder, because some people are perpetually in the stressors because they never seem to kind of alleviate themselves. We know that if we turn the TV on and we see shooting after shooting, or perhaps there's a police officer, or there's something corrupt within the system that is disruptive to the community, and we just see the ongoing onslaught. And this summer is probably a prime example where everyone took notice of, maybe less than every month, there was a new person that was victimized, and it was right there with video or audio for everyone to see. So how do we get post something that continues to happen? Even if we go back to the video that we let out with, the sister stated that she almost can't cry anymore. She almost doesn't feel anymore. Her affect was kind of flat around the whole subject matter. To me, that's because the traumas keep happening, and she's never allowed to become post. She's never allowed to experience the trauma at one point in time and then actually heal from that moment. Rather, there's points, 3 weeks, then another point, 3 or 4 weeks, then another point, then 3 or 4 weeks, and another point. So how, in terms of healing someone in the space of continued trauma, is also a dynamic that we have been exploring in our communities and within our sessions.
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
And healing, certainly that's, we can spend the rest of our time just talking about that, but re-experiencing that trauma, as you're talking about, what's the impact on our day-to-day lives going through that? How do I interact with my kid, my significant other, my extended family, a job, when I've got all of this stuff going on inside of me, and that I'm trying to sort out, experience, deal with? Where's my outlet? And oftentimes we see that people then resort to what technically you'll call negative coping strategies. They start doing things in a negative way that's not beneficial, whether it's increased drugs, whether it's negative interactions with their family, violence, you name it, making poor decisions. That type of effect is just tremendous.
And Dr. Dwayne, he touched on a good point as far as post. I mean, when he said that, I really want you all to really tell me about the crime that has never to any people in the annals of history, which is to be robbed thoroughly of your name, your language, your religion, and your culture as a people. So today, we are a people who have the oppressor's name. We're a people who have, in truth, the oppressor's culture, and in some situations, his religion. And so, can you all tell us about how that affects our mental health? Really, would you say that we're not in our right mind, not having our own, these dynamics that I just spoke on? And I'm sorry, Dr. Monique, you look like you wanted to touch on that one.
Well, okay, I wanted to go back to epigenetics also, but I think Sister Deja was trying to get in there on the last piece, but I want to defer to her if she wanted to speak, and then I can.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, just kind of building on what Dr. Doyne was saying regarding being in it versus that post, with us still being and not really having that space to be post, because there's healing in post, right? And that's what you see in some of the other communities, such as the Jewish community, and Japanese communities and things of that nature, where they have been harmed, but there's also been reparations to some extent made, and there has been space where they can, be in a post position. We've not experienced reparations in any sense, and it's not always financial, but the reparation to our physical bodies, spiritual bodies, our mental health, financially, we've not experienced the reparation process. And so I don't think that we are, post. I think that it is a daily, it's a daily for us that we're dealing with this.
Excellent. Dr. Monique?
Yeah, so I want to go back to the question about epigenetics, and then come forward to your question about the impact of us, having everything just extracted from the who that we are. And so when epigenetics is, many of us probably are maybe hearing it, or it's something that we're talking about now, particularly as it relates to historical trauma, that we understand now that there has been an epigenetic transfer of trauma through genes. And that's not something that was understood years ago. They do understand now, whereas our genetic makeup, which I'm not a geneticist by no stretch, so I'm going to talk about it lightly, but our genetic makeup, at one point we believed that it was just very static. Your genes came from mom and dad, they manifested to make you, and then you pass along, and that's it. Well, science is beginning to recognize that there is kind of an exchange, there's an interplay between a person's genetic makeup and the environment, and that the environment does impact genetic makeup. So some of the genes are static, and it is what it is. And then, so it's like hardware and software, I guess I could compare it. So epigenetics is more talking about the software of our genetic makeup. And in our living, in our interaction with our environment, with other people, one of the things that can be transferred is trauma. Trauma alters our genetic makeup. And when we procreate, we transfer that altered genetic makeup to our children, which renders them more vulnerable to experiences of trauma. So that's kind of the long and short, I guess, of kind of epigenetics and how it applies and relates to trauma, particularly historical trauma. So, but you pose a question in regard to, us being robbed of everything that we are: language, culture, name, religion, everything, and what that does to us. And so it is truly a painful experience. When you were saying it, what came to my mind is the movie Get Out, that I'm sure everybody here is familiar with, and a lot of your viewers are probably familiar with. It is truly a get out experience, that our minds have been hijacked, and another mind that is not germane to us has been kind of installed into our psyches. We call that internalized, right? So we have internalized racism, we have internalized white supremacy, so much so that we have a deep belief in Black inferiority. And that's the outcome. That's what we're seeing as a result of us buying into white is right. The other side of that is Black is wrong. When we talk about racial trauma, I like the I guess iteration that Ken Hardy came up with when he identifies 4 aspects, 4 impacts of racial trauma. And one is the internalized devaluation. Because we live in a society that again, white is right, black is wrong, white superiority, black inferiority is embedded in everything that we experience, everything that we're taught, everything that we see. That causes us to absorb the understanding that we don't possess value, or that value is only in white-bodied, white-bodied ideas, white-bodied physical bodies. And so we internalize that sense of inferiority, and we try to mimic and be like, as best as possible, our oppressors. The second thing that he talks about is the assaulted sense of self, which I call the spirit injury. That's the pain that results from us being in such an extraordinary, invalidating experience. That assaulted sense of self, that sense of who we are is not okay. And so the third thing is internalized voicelessness, that over years, over generations, centuries, right, we have learned that our voice, that we've learned not to have a voice. We've learned to mute our voice. We've learned that our voice doesn't matter. And so in the process of that, unless we can kind of reflect dominant white society, we don't think we have value in our voice. And the final thing he talks about is rage, which when I hear that, I think about what James Baldwin said, is to be Black and even, I think, partially conscious is to be in a state of rage all the time, right? He distinguishes rage from just anger, which he says anger is more present emotion. Rage is the accumulation of anger over time that's never been addressed, never been answered. And I would submit that we're not only transferring, well, that is the trauma. I was going to say not only transferring the trauma, but we're transferring all of that rage that we're accumulating as well. So I'll pause there because I'm sure the other panelists going to jump on that.
Yes, anyone.
Like to. And also, to speak a bit to that, I know I went to the first Million Men March, maybe 25 years ago. And one of the things I do, that's what I thought, 25 years. And one of my hardcore takeaways from that moment is to go back home and to join an organization that you believe in and practice its values, its mores, its ethics. And you mentioned the things that were taken away through the slavery. And I'm not saying those organizations are perfect organizations. I'm not saying those organizations are deeply entrenched in African values of sorts, but I am saying it is a starting place of consciousness starting to be developed. If you're practicing the values of a church, of a religion, if you're trying to get your body fit, you're trying to get your family fit, you're trying to get your community fit, find that thing that you believe in. And it almost seemed like those organizations were like a Noah's Ark of sorts. Find an ark to get inside, because you're going to have some rough waters to get over. And if you don't find an ark, potentially you could be washed away by the stressors, some of this conversation that we're having. And so one of the things I know that I did, because I want to make sure I speak to some of the doing in this conversation, is go back and look at some of those organizations and say, how do I invest my time, money, efforts, and energy in some of this space, embody the ideals from it. And then once I'm there, I start learning more and more and more. And that can help me make the bridge back to some deeper values that might push back to more African spiritual systems or African historical systems or governmental systems, because I'm starting here and I'm actually making my way back a middle passage of sorts. But I need a starting place to start that conversation. I still think that that thinking holds is valid now. Find something that you believe in and then really study it, practice it, research it, explore it, critique it, and then look for something deeper. Then practice that, then look for something deeper. Because if you keep looking for something deeper, it's probably going to take you back before this 400-year experience that we have that has us kind of ensconced in this slavery narrative. and it gets us necessarily out of that slave narrative and gets us back across the middle passage to some deeper ideas.
What you're talking about is really, you know, being enlightened, right? One of the things I tell my son, tell my students, once you learn something, people can't take that away from you. It's yours. You know, think of all the things that folks can take away or systems can take away. They can't take away your knowledge. They can't take away your thoughts and your enlightenment. Going through the process of systemic racism, you know, the Willie Lynch blueprint of, you know, how to really destroy and enslave a people. I think it's important for us to know, because it's important for us to understand what we have gone through and what is happening. Once you have that, then I believe there's a way to break that cycle, right? Listening to Dr. Swift talk about those 4 points, point number 3, the internalized voicelessness. You know, how many times, especially in this climate, how many times have we heard somebody say, you know, I'm not going to go vote. My vote it doesn't matter. You know, what's the point in doing that? That directly ties into that internalized voicelessness, right? That if you can't see that, I don't know what clear example you need. But once you see it, now you can do something different. Now you start to kind of challenge that thought and that notion. Am I voiceless, or is it that, you know, there's powers at play that want me to believe I'm voiceless, and therefore I don't go out and vote. I don't participate. I don't get enlightened. I don't find a collective group of people who will challenge me, who I can challenge, you know, to kind of explore and gain more knowledge. Once you start doing that, that's when you start kind of busting down those barriers and really challenging some of those systems that have been in place for a long time.
Absolutely. And you make up a good point. Now, I think as far as that voting, because that's a good subject, and I want everyone to know that you're watching Knowledge for Life's Knowledge Cypher Conference Series, Black Mental Health Matters. And we're going to do this series, God willing, every third Tuesday of the month with our panelists that you see on the screen. And every once in a while, we're going to definitely have individuals who will be guests on the program to talk about mental health, because it's such a broad issue. And I think one of the things that you're talking about is something that we'll definitely have to look at, and that is voting, holding our vote. Do we feel that we are powerless if we don't vote, if we do hold that vote? So I think that that's a good program that we'll definitely have to discuss in the future. I wanted to now talk about some of the things that you all were talking about. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, he talks about the self-accusing spirit, right? And how that spirit, that self-accusing spirit, is diminished or dimmed when we ignore it. Another thing in Dianetics, they call it engrams. The late, great Dr. Amos Wilson and Neely Fuller called it possession. And that is what Dr. Monique was talking about, being possessed by an external culture that really is self-destructive to the individual and to those of the same kind, if you will. Dr. Dwayne, I wanted to ask you a question, and that is, what are a few areas of focus that, well, this one, so how do we define racism and white supremacy, and how does it show itself in the lives of Black people?
Okay. You know, it's interesting that you were just leading in with a little bit of Dr. Amos Wilson. I had to discover him through, I think, the No Bookstore in DC some 30 years ago. back when there still were, Black bookstores on Nile Valley and Georgia Avenue. But, I have a few definitions here that I like to look at from scholars and writers on the subject of racism, white supremacy. W.E.B. Du Bois framed a few statements. He said the problem of the 20th century is the color line. He also said a system cannot fail those it was never meant to protect. Neely Fuller offers a simplistic term where he says racism is an incorrect system that promotes injustice. Of course, Frances Cress Welsing, the psychiatrist that we recently lost this ancestor a few years ago,
right,
reported racism, white supremacy as a local and global power system and dynamic structure maintained by those who classify themselves as white. This more recent authors, Ta-Nehisi Coates, defined it as a system of policies and beliefs that aims to keep African Americans as a peon class. I think many of our panelists might agree with some of these definitions. To him, whiteness is simply the normalized standard of what qualifies someone to be considered normal and deserving of American rights. So it's interesting when we talk about concepts of maybe who is a citizen. I came across this term some years ago called a denizen. And a denizen is more of someone who resides in an area, but does not necessarily have all of the possessed rights of a citizen. And sometimes, I would encourage the listening audience to go out there, and when you read more, you can understand more of these terms and the definitions, and then start making sense of this system that we're in. Understand the rules to it, the game theory behind it. And I'm not suggesting that I've mastered this. I'm always reading, and when I read, it helps me clarify. I want to always kind of improve my 2020 vision. I think Brother Melvin mentioned enlightenment. I know that's more of a 17th, 18th century concept, but I think what he's referencing is the consciousness behind it. So when you read, you're opening up your consciousness about the system and how it's impacting you. Once again, at that individual, couple, relationship, community, and nation-based level, you can understand how you're situated within it. And I want to offer one last one. Ibram Kendi recently wrote a book called, it was How to Be an Anti-Racist. And he was basically suggesting how we all play a part in this. I don't believe I'm about to quote Kanye, but I'm gonna do it, so bear with me. Kanye said, the things we buy to cover up what's inside because they made us hate ourselves and love their wealth. That was college dropout Kanye. But anyway, I think that quote is very relevant to where we are. We're my father once told me, you want to see one of the most confused group of people, look at the Black middle class, because they're trying to enter a system that they do not understand. And so one of the things we have to do is increase our understanding about the system. I don't say that to place blame on us, but I say that to bring consciousness to bear, to say, hey, let's do something. Let's become more mindful about the system that we're in. Do we want to take money and go buy the big car? Or do we do money and go invest in something that's going to bear some fruit for us, children, family, community, and nation building down the road? We can contribute towards organizations and institutions that are growing healthy Black concepts, religious, spiritual, physical. How do we contribute to those things? I know that's something that is on the forefront of my mind. Is I'd rather not buy that big car. I'd rather invest in things that are going to bear fruit down the road, even beyond the grave of sorts.
Yes, thank you. And let's go into and I'll ask this to you, Sister Deasia. When we look at this COVID-19, and we started off talking about the COVID-19 and these pre-existing conditions, right? These pre-existing conditions, some of the pre-existing conditions that causes our physical health to literally be lowered is this system of racism and white supremacy. And we see that in stress, We see that in maternal and infant mortality. We see that in what they call weathering. Sister Deasia, can you talk about how our mental health affects our physical health?
Oh, yeah. So as we've been talking about trauma in a general sense and looking at race-based and racialized trauma, when we look at like symptoms of PTSD, that's occurring over the course of time. And some of the symptoms that we'll see hyperarousal, we'll see dissociation, we see the helplessness, we see the hopelessness, we see hypervigilance. And those are, specific to PTSD in a general sense, but over the course of time, those become more ingrained. So where Dr. Monique was talking about the internalized, like that voicelessness and things like that, we see excessive shyness and kind of diminished, like a diminished sense of self and, inability to, what is it? I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought. We see chronic fatigue and, issues with our immune system because stress in and of itself, it impacts our bodies. And so when we're talking about over the course of time, starting out with, some of those initial symptoms, and then, we're going as time goes along and we're constantly under this stress, it's going to wear and tear on our bodies just like anything else. If you were to exercise too hard and you wear out your knee, it's a similar concept. So if we're constantly under stress, racialized or other, but for us racialized, it has an impact on our bodies. And, for us, that's our immune system, that's our endocrine systems, we might have psychosomatic illnesses where we're just achy and we're in pain and, all this. And so sometimes we don't really understand where that stuff comes from, but we have to understand that our body and mind are connected. And so even when we get into things like depression and anxiety, we feel those things in our body. So when we're feeling the stress of racialized trauma, we're also feeling that on a daily basis in our body. And, for some people, it shows up, and whereas COVID has really, I don't even know that COVID illuminated. I feel like we knew this before. I feel like we were talking about these issues before. This is not, I think, people are kind of jumping on it now, like, oh, COVID this. And it's like, well, we've been trying to tell y'all that we've been sick and we've been in pain and this has been happening to us. But people don't want to listen, right?
Amen.
So that, that's part of it is, people haven't been listening, and it's important that people listen when we're telling you this, and recognizing that, going to work, for example, and maybe being the only Black person on your team and having to deal with daily microaggressions, that can take a toll on you mentally. And then when you start to go to work and you are starting to feel physically ill, that's not from nothing. That is because you're under a constant stress. You're under a barrage of stress on a daily basis because they're going to say something about your hair, or they're going to say something about how you talk or how you show up in the room, or are you too mad, or for men, maybe you were too forceful, and you're like, well, I just said a regular sentence, but it felt a little too forceful for some folks. And so, but then we take that with us and we carry that with us and we internalize that, and it takes a toll on our physical bodies, just like it does on our mental, our minds.
Boy, that stress is powerful, isn't it?
It is.
Dr. Swift talked about it from the genetic component, but you just drove it home, that social component, you pass that along. You take that stress home, your kids feel it, your significant other feels it, and then, they internalize it, and it's a super spreader.
Yep, it is. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we don't talk about what that does to our nervous systems, right? So we're looking at what increased cortisol levels, right? So when you have increased cortisol, you're more likely to gain more weight, right? Then we're talking about diabetes, we're talking about hypertension, we're talking about all these diseases that a lot of times people are like, well, if you just eat better, well, to an extent, right? Like you can eat better, right? That's not for nothing, but that's apples and oranges are not going to solve that. Okay.
Well, in communities that don't have
that don't have access to that don't have access to healthy, clean food. Right. Exactly.
And so, I mean, wow, you all touched on some powerful things. And Sister DeAsia, you're so right, because we were hearing about the increase, for instance, of our youth and the suicide rate among our youth. I mean, this was something when I was growing up, we never, it was basically unheard of. I mean, there's a lot of mental issues that when I was growing up was really unheard of. And if you did hear about it, it was not a epidemic among our community, if you will. And I know that the next program we're going to talk about, you know, the stigma of seeking mental health services, if you will. So
that's what I was going to say. I think that it was in our community. I don't think that our community has been without these mental health issues until this is not a recent phenomenon. You're talking about 400 plus years of ongoing, you know, legalized, sanctioned trauma on our bodies, our minds, our persons, our spirit, right? So that's not, you know, it's not with, like, it's been here. We have discussed it differently, and we have said, you know, grandma had a nervous breakdown or such and such this, or, you know, we have our ways of talking about it, but it has always been here. It's always been here.
I did a talk, I'm just reflecting now, it's over 2 decades ago, at the National Association of Black Social Workers, their annual convention. And I did the talk on suicide in our community. And at that time, 2 decades ago, I was talking about how the numbers were increasing. Yep. They are definitely increasing exponentially now, but absolutely, sis, you're on point, because it was, this is 2 decades ago, it was increasing. And Brother Steve, you brought up suicide. That's the fast death, and that is what we're seeing. But the slow death is the recklessness that we live our lives with, this, you know, apathy that we're constantly under, that we don't care about our lives. And so you see things like, you've heard about how our young people are planning their own funerals, because we want to, everything we do, we want to do it with a show, right? We want people to see us. And so we're planning our funerals at 15, 16, 17 years old, because everybody I know is going by their early 20s. So I guess I'm going to be going by my early 20s too. And this is how I want to go out.
Internalized devaluation, your first point. That's exactly what we're talking about. Low self-esteem, no sense of self-worth, right? No value, and I shouldn't say no, for some, not valuing life, right? I'm going to go out and do risky things because why not? Why not? You know, if I get, you know, to 24, I beat the curve in some areas. Yep. That's not okay. That's more symptoms of the trauma that we have experienced in our culture, in our communities, that we have to break. It should not be okay for 15-year-olds to be thinking about their funeral. That's just not okay.
That's right. That's right. And so that leads us really into what I wanted to talk about next is, what are the psychological impacts of racism? And you all mentioned it, and I'll name some of them: self-identity, self-hate, an inferiority complex, disunity, anxiety, depression, PTSD, I mean, we can go on and on with that, but I would love for you all to talk about what we need to address. And I think Sister Deasia, you talked about it, and that is that what's called learned helplessness. And also, if you can talk about Stockholm syndrome, how we believe, I guess, as a people, being under the system for so long, that we are dependent on this system. Can either anyone start that conversation off? And then we'll get into some solutions and begin to wrap it up, and hopefully take some calls as well. So Dr. Dwayne, can you start that off?
Okay, I just wanted to get a little clarity on that question. Pardon me, Brother Muhammad.
Yes, sir. I was just talking. I wanted to address the issue of how it affects us, racism in this negative type of way, with the inferiority complex, learned helplessness, and Stockholm syndrome. If you could talk about any of those.
So one of the things that's coming to mind is, I always want to give people something to kind of consider as they're listening to this, either live or in the archive. When I meet with folks, I ask them questions about their life, their community life, and maybe what their work life looks like, if people are actively engaged in those three areas. I talk to them about what they would desire for that to look like. I have to have an understanding of what they consider as wellness. I don't want it to be my understanding of wellness. I want to understand their concept of wellness. So at home, I'm talking about how you manage stress, how you manage relationships in your home, how you get along with folks. Are you building? Do you have a plan for each other? What are you doing down the road in that perspective? Your community life, whether it's church, religion, mosque, temple of sorts. How are you engaged in your community? Are you volunteering? Are you giving? How do you support neighbors, even if it's a family 2 or 3 houses down from you, or 2 or 3 apartment doors down from you? How are you engaged in your community? And your work life. Are people showing up in their authentic selves? And if they are not showing up in that space, talking about how those things are impacting their wellness. I want people to find spaces where they can feel not just unjudged, but a space where they can grow. It's kind of like the concept of a fish tank. I had a buddy back in high school who had a fish tank. I think the name of the fish was called Oscars. And if you had a 20-gallon tank, then the fish would only grow maybe 4 or 5 inches. Then he bought a 60-gallon tank, and then the fish expanded to about 7 inches. And then I think he got an 80-gallon tank, and that fish expanded to 9 or 10 inches. And I did not know that the fish's growth was proportionate to the tank. I only put that out there as an example to say, what kind of environments do you find yourself in, home, work, and community? Is it too small for you? What do you need to do to expand that reality? How do you delve a bit more into your religious study? How do you delve a bit more into finding the tribe? I do have a person I work with, and this person calls it their tribe. I need a tribe that's healthy. They promote me, they support me, and they help me meet my goals. This tribe is not here to pull me down. So that's part of that community self. So as people are listening to this, consider home, work, and community. Are those fish tanks of sorts, are they big enough to allow you to expand to where you need to be? If not, counseling, therapy is a space that gives you that space. Therapists know how to hold space for themselves, and they hold enough space for you to have your own reality and to be able to expand that consciousness outside of where you are and help support you to where you need to be. I will say that I do see, especially in this telehealth era, more Black folks availing themselves of therapy online. I'm sure it's live as well. I don't know how COVID has impacted it, but I do see more people making use of it. So reach out to one of the folks that you see on this panel, reach out within your insurance providers, or reach out within your religious systems if that's a third avenue. There are people in your community that are there to support you and they want to help you. This is what they've gone to school for and practiced. This is their passion. I really encourage people to tap in and give themselves the space that they deserve.
Absolutely. Would
wanted
anyone
to-
else?
Yeah,
Yes, go right
I
ahead.
want to chime in on this idea of the learned helplessness. I have a fish example too, Brother Dwayne. And so I want to point out this idea of premature cognitive commitment. Premature cognitive commitment is one of the ways. Like this is not, again, it's not accidental. The way we behave, the way we are responding to our oppression is understood. It's studied. There's science behind this. The premature cognitive commitment talks about how we manifest ourselves. Like Dwayne the example he gave with the fish kind of spoke a little bit about it regarding the environment and how the environment shapes the mind of the person. When you limit someone, they stay within their limits. And so there was an experiment. There were 3 of them. One, this is the 5th one, where that they put fish in this huge tank and they divided the tank with a clear glass right down the middle. And initially the fish thought that they had the full expanse, but after a while they kept on hitting that glass. Eventually they would only circle around and swim around in their half. They would no longer hit that glass. Scientists find that when they remove the glass, the fish continue to circulate just in their area. That psychologically, they already have committed to the understanding that this is the only parameter. This same experiment was done like with an elephant. And you take a baby elephant and you tie it to a twig, and because it's small and young, it can't really let loose. It can't get loose. But after years and years of being tied to that twig, that elephant now is a big, giant elephant that within just a small gesture could break the twig and break the string, but they don't, because again, the psyche has already determined that this is my limitation, right? And so a similar thing was done with fleas and keeping fleas in a jar. You could take the lid off the jar and the fleas don't go beyond that. So we are functioning in a society that has put constraints around us such that even if they were removed, we would stay within the parameters that were already prescribed in our psyche. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan says it like this: he who prescribes the diameter of your knowledge determines the circumference of your actions.
And look at what happens when people finally realize that they can break through that barrier, right? That's exactly what we're talking about. You know, are you I won't just say stuck, but are you relegated to just, you know, your small side of the pond, your area of the community? You know, how many times have you guys heard people say, you know, I've never been more than 6-7 blocks outside of my neighborhood, because what else is there? I got everything I need right here. You know, but you take those same individuals and expose them to new parts of communities and show them that there are other ways to live, to thrive, to see people who look like you, to go to New Jersey, to go to, you know, Michigan, Detroit, you know, California, name it. You can't unsee that. And then you start to kind of think, oh, well, maybe there is something else. Maybe I can do something different. That's how you start to combat that learned helplessness, that sense of, you know, it doesn't really matter what I do because it's just not going to work out. All of a sudden, you've got some knowledge, you've got some experience, that something else can happen, and can happen in a positive way. That's what we're talking about. That's what Dr. Dwayne was talking about in getting with other people who are going to help you thrive. We're not promoting anything negative, helping you thrive, helping you to expand your knowledge base and expand your experience, because that's how you improve your mental health. That's how you start to address your trauma. That's how you bring about lasting positive change, not only for the individual, but for your family and your community, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And Melvin, just adding to that piece real quick, I would say therapy is definitely a place for people to expand. I've seen leadership development to be a space for people to expand, or coaching for places for people to expand beyond the self-imposed limitations, the societal limitations that are placed, even the family. I worked at an institution. My grandmother passed at 101 years old, and she said, "I didn't know they let Negroes work here." But during her day and time, she was born in 1911, they did not let Negroes work there. And so I had to essentially see myself outside of the paradigm in which she saw herself. That's no disrespect to grandma, rest in paradise. But that's to recognize grandma had a foundation, and what I'm supposed to do is kind of exist on the shoulders of that foundation and the shoulders of the next foundation. Sometimes I empower people for them to recognize you might be the first person in your family to break free with a new consciousness. And 60, 70 years from now, they're going to say, Grandpa Melvin, Grandma Deasia, Grandma Monique, she or he was the first one in our family, or Grandpa Stephen was the first person in our family to break free from the restraints of the past. Whether it went from slavery to sharecropping to projects, there's always that one person that's going to break the paradigm, and then the next generation, if they're paying attention, can start to exist on the shoulders of that prior generation. And if there's no one there, then it's you.
True generational wealth.
You're the one.
Right. And you know that really touches on one of the messages that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan did. He titled it "Black Youth: A Justifiable Homicide. Black Youth in Peril." So, I mean, you all are talking some powerful things. And so, as you're saying, Dr. Dwayne, you know, the target is always the Black youth, particularly the Black young male, because he may break those shackles, you know, he may break that tether, you know. So can you all talk maybe just a little bit about some of, you know, if you could talk to the youth, how they can start this journey to proper mental health and some of the proper coping mechanisms that they should look into. And Sister Deasia, can you start that off? And maybe since you work with young women, can you talk to young women specifically?
So I definitely think that it is imperative that we start to teach our kids how to take care of themselves, and what that means in terms of taking care of their mental health, in terms of their physical health, in terms of their spiritual health. And, you know, it's up to us to help them understand. I think on our end, we have to be open and we have to be honest about things. I think that's an area that for a lot of us, we didn't have that exposure to know that folks were going through things with their mental health because there wasn't an openness about it. And I think we have to start having conversations about, you know, really our feelings and recognizing and acknowledging our feelings and allowing our children to, you know, come to us and have space and have safety with us as their parents, but also in the community as well, right? Because our families are looking different every day. So, having space in the community so they have a place to come to express themselves, and that they can talk to us and not feel judged. So really taking care of their mental health, and, telling them about the importance of going to therapy, telling them about the importance of even working out, or taking care of your body physically. But I also think, as we talked about wellness a little bit earlier, it also, that economic piece is also a big piece too. So we have to have conversations around, we're talking about generational wealth, and we need to, have conversations around some of these other aspects of wellness with them. In addition to mental, physical, spiritual, we need to be talking about financial. We need to be talking about social. We need to be talking about, what else?
Black power.
Yeah, we have to,
Black Wall Street.
we have to make sure that we're talking about all of these things, because we want them to be well-rounded, and we want them to develop in all these areas, and we want them to understand how, when one of these areas are lacking, it can have an impact on another area in your life, namely the mental health aspect in your life. So I definitely think that, we have to start having open and honest conversations with our kids about that. And I also think, especially as I work with women, we're put in a box a lot of times. And so we have to help women also to understand that, we're not just moms and wives and girlfriends all the time, right? We can make a difference in our community as well. And so we have to, encourage that, that little girls are becoming what they want to become, and helping them thrive in that. And, as we talk about, especially in the schools, we need to be in our kids' schools. We need to be making sure that these classrooms are really doing what they're supposed to be doing, and providing a space where they can grow educationally, and really, a positive place for our, probably talk more on that, but I'll let somebody else talk
All
on
right. And we'll go down the line. Sister Dr. Monique, can you talk on that?
Yeah, so many things came to mind when you asked that question. I when it comes to mental health for our young people, I would want to urge them toward healing, towards recognizing the injury. We have traditionally, historically, been a suck it up and moving on, not because we're ignorant, but because we had to, right? There was no time during when we were enslaved. There was no time for us to sit down and talk about our problems and to pamper ourselves. And no, we had to, in order to survive, just suck it up and keep going. And that's embedded in us today. And so I would want to encourage young people to recognize the injury, recognize the hurt. Don't just suck it up and move on. That not just recognize it, but then begin to activate yourselves toward healing, right? And then I think too, there are levels of that. And so, like Dr. Dwayne talked about earlier, the context is in which we live. So when I talk about healing, there's a healing that happens to the individual, but there's also the healing that has to happen within relationships that individual has with their family, and then again with the larger community, right? And so healing from an African traditional perspective, illness was never seen in an individual. From the African traditional perspective, illness was seen in an individual in respect to other individuals. So it's in relationships. It was never embodied in an individual. And so we need to really begin to recognize that, I can't remember the name of the person who said it, but we are each other's healing. We are each other's healing. And we have to come out of her and come into our own selves if we are to really be healed, truly healed. And so I'm reminded of the words of Elijah Muhammad about our unity being more powerful than a nuclear bomb. And so that holds true not just for a social-political type of activity, but that also holds true for our healing, for our psychological healing as well. And so that's there was an Indian writer, last part, and this just came to mind. There was an Indian writer who said, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
Mm.
When I read that, I tried to, and it fits what I'm saying. It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. If I had anything that I want to urge young people, stop trying to fit in to this society. Come out of this society. There's no salvation for us inside.
You know, Martin Luther King, he talked about being maladjusted. Yeah, maladjusted, and he was happy to be maladjusted in a society like this. Yes, Dr. Dwayne, would you like to talk on that? And let me ask you the question like this. How can Black people fortify themselves and their families to manage stress from social media, news, and the political climate?
Okay, I just want to pick up on the last comments. There was an interview years ago when Snoop Dogg was talking about why he joined the Crips. And he said that there was no one else in his community, and they were the ones that took him in. So I trust he knows his experience better than I do. But what I'm saying in this matter is, no matter what community I've gone to, I've always seen good people in those communities. No matter how hard they said, well, don't go here, don't go down that street. I've always seen Miss Jones, Miss Jenkins, Brother James, whoever it is, there are always good people in those communities. So I would say to the young folks, look for those people. You have some good quality people down the hall from you, down the street from you, in your schools, somewhere in your community. There are some people to emulate in there, and no telling who those people know that might start you off on your path towards employment or just serving as a mentor. So pay attention to some of those good folks that are in your community. I trust that they're right next door or right down the street, even if there's some bad things going on in your community. Look for the folks that you believe are heading in the right path. Regarding social media, I still adhere to the same thing. When 9/11 happened and the towers were struck, this is before social media, back in 2001. I remember, how many times do you need to watch the news to see an image burned into your brain, where right now I imagine the panelists could even imagine what it looks like, that image of that plane hitting that building. So I learned to get it once or twice, and then I need to decrease the visual images. I do not need to see this thing 10, 11, 12 different times, because at a certain point, I'm now tipping towards maybe that apathy that the sister was talking about at the beginning of the video, or losing the affect where I don't feel anymore. I don't feel indifferent about it, or maybe just feeling angry or rage, as Sister Monique spoke of. So I encourage people, pull to the literature, start reading about it. Maybe you watch it 2 or 3 times, then you cut it off and say, I'm going to start tracking the storyline on this, and then get behind the story and learn who this person was. One thing I can really appreciate when they said, say her name, Breonna Taylor, say her name, bring life to the story, and so we can really understand who she was. We know that part of the thinking is to dismantle the person that has just been executed in front of our eyes, to find the stick of candy that they took when they were in 4th grade and somehow demonize the person. Let's say their names, let's read about who they are, and look at the interview, so we can start doing what the sister said at the beginning. This is a human being, just the flavor of the week or the flavor of the month. This is a real life human being connected to a mama, a daddy, siblings, loved ones, family members, community, that systems piece that I was talking about. So I encourage people, watch 2 or 3 times, then start reading and take it to your tribe and talk to your tribe about it. Tribe process these things. If y'all need to cry, shout it out, discuss it, process it, and do that within a safe group. But that means you have to have that safe group. And that means you have to be developing that safe group ongoing. I'm always looking to expand my tribe. And I'm thankful to be on this show and meeting these panelists and Brother Stephen this is doing what I need myself. I am not above the system nor below it. I'm as impacted as the people that come into my office. I'm not exempt from the stressors of this work. That shows up in sessions where we both are processing at that level, because I don't come in with some guru understanding of the issue. These things impact me as well. And I got to call my colleagues, my tribe, and process these things. So I encourage people to develop their own tribes, people that are going to help you along the way.
Yes, sir. Thank you. That's powerful. And then, as we're beginning to wind this up and close this out, one of the things that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said that, prerequisite knowledge, he was saying, is the knowledge of God, the knowledge of self, the knowledge of the time and what must be done, and the knowledge of the true religion. And then, so as you all are saying, for our youth, that knowledge of God and the knowledge of self, those are two that are related to each other in all actuality. So as we close this, begin to close this out, can we just go over some proper methods of what we would call self-care as far as our mental health? What are some of the things that we can do starting now to improve our mental health as a people? And I will start with you, Dr. Melvin.
I think Dr. Dwayne was just talking about something that is critical, particularly in this day and age. One way that you can start to improve your mental health is by putting some parameters on your exposure to social media, on your exposure to the internet, television, so on and so forth. There's nothing wrong with being informed. There's nothing wrong with being properly educated, in the know, utilizing technology. But there does come a time when you need to unplug, recenter yourself, take some time to do some reflections, take some time to get outside, to interact face to face, not camera to camera, but face to face with people. When you do that, there's some synergy. There's some health that comes along with that, right? You're learning how to take on different cues, social cues. You're learning how to have a conversation, how to go back and forth with someone, again, in a healthy way. Doing those things has a major impact on your wellness, on your ability to cope with the stressors, the constant stressors that we've talked about during this panel, that people have to deal with every day. So, without having to say to somebody, start this particular program, go to this particular place, you can start right in your own home, right with yourself, by just saying, I'm going to put some restrictions, some parameters on me, right? I'm going to make sure that I carve out some time during the day to have, a space to reflect, to have a moment to myself, to have an ability to talk to someone face to face in a healthy, positive way. You start there and then expand on from there.
All right, thank you. And we'll go next with you, Sister Deasia. Can you give us some healthy methods?
Something that I try to encourage with some of my clients is to try to cultivate a sense of gratitude. Try to find something positive in your day, even if that's just naming a couple of things. Because what that does is it makes you intentional to something that has been positive or good that has happened to you. during that day, and doing that on a regular basis can, it becomes natural for you, right? Looking for the positive in, a situation where it may not be an overall great situation, but you're always trying to find something, positive to pull at. I also would recommend, making sure that you're taking care of your physical health, especially in this time of COVID where, we're not doing a ton of like interacting. There's so much that you could be, possibly doing like online, and whether that's through YouTube or wherever, finding things that you are enjoying to be physically healthy to improve your mental health. And then, of course, I'm definitely a proponent of going to therapy. So therapy, whether it's group therapy, support groups, or individual therapy, are all things that you can do to help take care of your mental health and cope during this time. And there are not a lot, I won't say a lot, but it is growing ways that you can do that. Definitely making sure that you're, if you have insurance, checking with your insurance carrier to see, who's in your network. The Loveland Foundation is a awesome foundation that will take care of like 4 to 5 sessions for a person if they qualify for the services. Open Path Collective is another services. They help with low cost mental health services. And then the Boris Henson Foundation is another foundation, just off the top of my head. So, those are 3 things that I would say could help in this time to help you cope. So,
yes, thank you. And Dr. Dwayne, can you, and we'll end with you, Dr. Monique.
So I want to thank you, Brother Stephen, for this forum.
Yes, sir.
As I listen to my fellow panelists here, I feel like it's given me some renewed thoughts and has refreshed my mind, so I can go back and do more of this work with the people that I serve. So thank you for this forum.
Thank you.
So I would say, as a kid, when my family would kind of drive around DC, one of the things I saw down on the mall across from the Washington Monument is I would see people doing this kind of Tai Chi related movement. I didn't know what that was at the time. So over time, I would come across it, read about it. And what I saw every time I would go down there is when it's raining, they did Tai Chi. When it was snowing, they did Tai Chi. When it was hot, they did Tai Chi. When it was cold, they did Tai Chi. Wow. So what I later gathered from that moment is that they developed a practice they were going to do rain, snow, sun, you feel good, you don't feel good. They were doing Tai Chi. So I'm building off of what some of the other panelists have said is find a modality or method that works for you. Find a practice that works for you. As a therapist, I know I need to be refilled so I can go back out and do the work that I need to do. I engage in spiritual practice to make sure that I'm reading YouTube videos. I make sure I'm at the gym or at least exercising outdoors. I try to get a good 15 to 20 miles a weekend, even if I'm just walking. I'm more of a walker than a runner, but still I try to get out there. And it took me years to figure out that I need a practice. And the practice is what keeps me grounded so I can engage in the clinical practice. Also, one thing I'll throw out there is the term etymology or ways of knowing how people form knowledge. I'll say that you need to explore alternative spiritual paths. Give yourself permission to move into that space, to read, to understand, to explore, whether it's spirituality, philosophy, psychology, or indigenous ways of knowing, or African spiritual systems. Make sure that you're delving into the pieces that match your psyche. Give yourself permission to explore. Something new could be revealed to you about body, mind, and spirit. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And Sister Monique, yes, Can you chime in on that one?
I'll chime in, and I mean, the panelists have like covered all the bases, and I fear I'm going to be redundant, but in responding to that, I just kind of want to touch all the levels of individual, family, and community. And so on an individual level, I think everybody really kind of said a lot. You know, Sister D, as you talked about the therapy. Dwayne, you tuned into something I'm a huge proponent of, and that is meditation. It's not necessarily talk about the Tai Chi, but creating a practice is the point. When you talked about that, that resonated for me a lot, that I would want to urge people to create a practice for themselves that is healthy, that's healing. You also mentioned spiritual, like I think Sister Deja mentioned that you have to kind of tie in the spirit with the physical health and wellness and eating right. So on an individual level, we want to kind of have all of those pieces. But the other piece, I think, that Dwayne touched on is kind of an educational piece. That is, I think, an often understated quality not quality, but understated method of healing. What we need to do, we'd be surprised, is we developed a critical consciousness around what we're seeing happening in society. And Dwayne mentioned epistemology. So that could help us to develop an epistemic interrogation about why are we in this condition? How, what can we do? What are the mechanisms at play? What systems uphold where we are, right? And then kind of through that, there's an inspiration that can come from that can really kind of incite us ahead toward action. And so on a family level, I would want to encourage us toward atonement with family and others, really pulling together. We're not going to get anywhere as a disjointed group of people. We have to bridge those gaps. We have to, strengthen the links in the chain. And then finally, community, getting out there and getting involved towards social justice issues that are relevant to us can also be very healing as well.
Thank you. And I like to chime in on it with my with my militant mind, right? And for me, one thing that helps me mentally get through as we're talking about the healing, from the mental effects of systemic racism is what Dr. Khalid, the late great Dr. Khalid, said. And he said, oppose what the enemy supports and support what the enemy opposes. and so, because I mean, you in this day and time, you really can't go wrong with that, because whatever he's pushing, usually it's not good for us, and that covers a range of things. Another thing that helps me is, as you were saying, I think, Dr. Dwayne, is that, I get out, we have parks here in Dayton, Ohio, where you can walk down these paths, get fresh air. I think that if we get out and get some fresh air and we're not stuck inside these homes, doing the shelter in place, because we as a people, we suffer from what's called SAD, seasonal immune deficiency disease, I believe it's called. But you can suffer from that in the summer if you never get out and get the sun soaking into that melanated skin. Another thing that I would suggest too, that when we're stressed, we don't breathe. So I think that if we can take some deep breaths. And the beautiful thing about this program is that hopefully, as we continue to produce these programs every third month, we can come up with programs for the people who follow us in these programs. And I guess, let me see here. Lastly, I would say is to gain a knowledge of self, study our history as a people. I just interviewed Brother Jabbar Odell. I'm not gonna mess up my brother's name, but he's an educator, and I interviewed him, and gaining the knowledge of ourself, which has been really hidden from us, really puts some wind beneath our wings as a people. And I think that young people, one of the beautiful things about this COVID-19 is that, they are able to get online and see and hear some of these brothers and sisters who are culturally conscious. And this is really, I think, helping to break, as we are talked about earlier, those tethers to this system. So I guess with that, any closing remarks that anyone has to say? And then I want to also say that Sister Naira will hopefully be joining us in the future. She comes from a Dianetics background with the auditing and becoming clear. So we look forward to that aspect of mental health as well. So closing us out, we'll go down the line. We'll start with the brothers and end with the sisters. Dr. Melvin, can you close us out with any parting words?
Well, again, thank you for this opportunity to share with the audience this great panel. I really appreciate the invitation and look forward to future broadcasts and future topics. I certainly will just remind everybody, we have a lot to endure. We have endured a lot, but we have a pathway to wellness. It's through that education. It's through the expansion of knowledge. It's through our ability to increase our self-esteem, our self-worth. We can do that. There are people who are willing to help. There are people who are willing to guide. And there are people who are willing to share their story of how they improve as an individual and as a community, as a family. So it is not all doom and gloom. We can do better, and we have an avenue to do it. So with that, I appreciate it, and thank you.
Thank you. And brother, Dr. Dwayne?
All right. Thank you, Brother Muhammad, for the forum. Just keeping this real brief right here. Build your tribe. I would say, look at those 4 points I was talking about earlier. Look at yourself as an individual. You're also a part of a system. You're also a part of a community. You're also a part of a nation. Look for the connections between each one of those. And there's a certain amount of doing at each level. There's individual doing, there's familial doing, there's community doing, and there's nation building doing, if that makes sense. And whether it's reading, getting into practice, I believe some of those pieces will reveal themselves over time as to what that doing is all about. And maybe your purpose is also tied into that work. So thank you.
Yes.
And thank you for the panelists. Great ideas.
Yes, sir. Thank you, brother. And Sister Deasia?
Just like they've said before, thank you once again for having me on here. I'll just leave with this, as we've been talking about trauma and we've been talking about healing and ways to heal. Just like, trauma, as it was mentioned before, trauma does change us, but we do know that there is healing in relationships, and I'm a proponent of working to build those relationships. And like Dr. Dwayne said, that relationship with self is going to be important, that relationship with your family, that relationship with community, and then that relationship to the bigger world is going to be important. So it's not an easy, it's not an easy thing to do, but it can be done. And there are a ton of us in this field that are here to help. And so it's not something that, you have to go alone. And so we're here trying to do that work. And, whenever folks are ready to start those journeys and do that work, we are here for you. And I just want folks to be well and to take care. So
yes,
thank you.
Thank you, sister. And sister Monique, Dr. Monique, can you close us on out? And then we'll just quickly, real quick, if any of you want to give out your website or your contact information, we'll go ahead and do that as well. And we'll close right on out. Dr. Monique, go right ahead.
Well, so as the others, I want to thank you also, Brother Stephen, and thank each one of you all for a rich conversation. Your input was so very valuable. Sister Deasia, she set the table perfectly for me. She basically said really eloquently what I want to kind of, my parting words, and it's just unity, 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 unity. You cannot underscore that enough. Again, we said earlier, I'm echoing the words of someone whose name I can't recall right now, but said that we are each other's medicine. We are each other's medicine. We have the answers to those things that ail us. So we have to begin to lean on and look to each other for the healing that we need. And also, again, recognizing how important unity is. It has been said that no man can rise above the condition of his people. And so while they're the Oprah Winfrey's and the Michael Jordans, and, we have people who are, at the top, right, who are at high heights, but look at us as a collective, look at us as a people. And if I just want to urge us, pull together. Together we can get to the other side. And so I leave you with those words. Thank you. Thank
you. And I just wanted to say to each and every one of you, thank you. Thank you for being a part of this this conversation. Thank you for coming on. And I think that, what's so beautiful as a people, and I think you were alluding to it, Dr. Dwayne, is that, and you too, Sister Deasia, that we're beginning that process of mentally seeking help and therapy and healing. And so this is a beautiful thing as we as a people, or really we're breaking this chain of dependency on this system of white supremacy. We're coming into a knowledge of ourselves and ownership of self and our actions. So I really want to thank you all. And we look forward to having more conversations in the future. And what we also want to do as we develop this is to have the conversation on social media, even after we end this program, on some of the things that we talked about. All of this, of course, is in the development. For those who are watching, Knowledge for Life, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So any donation that you give is a tax write-off, of course, over a certain amount. But anything that you can give is appreciated to help us to continue to produce programs like this with these professionals, these Black mental health professionals. And I really appreciate you all coming on. And I guess as we're going to close out with a small sound clip of Dr. Neely Fuller. And then if you all could hold on the line for a few minutes, and then we'll go ahead and close this out. So check this out. This is Neely Fuller, and thank you all for watching. May God continue to bless you and your family with the light of truth and understanding.
All Black people are mentally ill, and all white people in the system of white supremacy are mentally ill. You don't have any people who are not mentally ill in a system that is a mentally ill system. The system of racism, when you have a world government based on mistreating people based on color, you have mentally ill people. So we're all mentally ill. Now, the white supremacists are the supreme people in this mentally ill system. They are the prison wardens running a prison full of mentally ill people, and the people who are running the prison are also mentally ill because they are dominating and mistreating people based on color. That's a mentally ill proposition right from the beginning. So everybody is mentally ill. So, but who are to blame? Who are the people to blame for this situation? The white supremacists, of course. Every last one of them, because they're the ones who set it up, this mentally ill system. So therefore, if anybody's being mistreated in the system, because the system is designed to mistreat the people who have been made mentally ill from birth, then the people who are running the institution, the mentally ill institution, are to blame for this mentally ill situation that we have going over all over the planet. This is why the system has to be completely eliminated, and a sane system replacing it called justice. Justice is better than racism as a world system. That's the theory anyway. Mm-hmm. Justice has never been tried seriously, but it needs to be tried seriously for the first time in the history of the known universe.